Okay, I wanted to start out this evening with an overview of what the Common Core state standards are about and how they might be implemented, and that's what you just heard. In planning this forum, it was difficult because if you read the newspapers, if you listened, it is a very controversial issue in the sense that there are several perspectives, several ideas, beliefs, and values regarding what the Common Core state standards are all about. So I intentionally made sure that I read a variety of articles that were written about the Common Core state standards, and I tried to balance out as much as possible who the presenters are. We have with us tonight Dr. Oran Smith. He's going to be our first keynote presenter, followed by Dr. Eric Smith. So we went to Smith and Smith. That was my criteria, because I wanted two Smiths on the panel. I am going to forego a lengthy biography description of who Dr. Oran Smith is, because you have it right in front of you, and I want to spend more time in actually listening to what the content is that they have to present, and also I want to move towards the panel discussion. So Dr. Oran Smith, please join us.
All right, thanks, Dean. I think we're going to be ready with a PowerPoint here. Thank you very much. Thank you to that first panel for that informative presentation. I learned a great deal in that presentation. Appreciate it very much. I'd like to correct one item from some of the information that went out, and that listed me as an educator. I'm actually kind of more of a policy wonk. A mile wide and an inch deep in some ways, but Common Core state standards is something that I've been studying as a part of my work at Palmetto Policy Forum really since our inception a little over a year and a half ago. And I never have actually seen one piece of research that I felt matched my thoughts about Common Core state standards, so I proceeded to attempt to do some research of my own. And that research was published as a short paper by Palmetto Policy Forum that is available from our website, palmettopolicy.org. What I would like to present to you tonight are some questions that have been raised about Common Core state standards, and hopefully do it in a way that's somewhat lighthearted so that we can get through these and still have our sanity intact. And those that follow me we'll be able to help analyze some of these things that I've raised, and I believe we'll have pretty much everything that's said about Common Core in some way. We'll have it on the table after this. So first of all, the year was 1983, as we said. I was I think a college sophomore, and Ronald Reagan was president, and all was right with the world, right? Education became a hot topic when his Secretary of Education, Terrell Bell, was commissioned to write a report. That report became known as A Nation at Risk. And again, the wording of that report was very strong. It said, if a foreign power had imposed the schools on our nation that were imposed upon us, if our education system had been imposed by an outside force, we would have considered that an act of war. Those are very strong words, but that was a part of the A Nation at Risk report, and it was meant to raise the issue of education to the prominence that it deserved in our country. Well, along came the whole movement for accountability. That was the golden age of writers like E.D. Hirsch, who wrote Cultural Literacy, of which I'm a great fan of, which became somewhat of a curriculum in its own right. The accountability movement began. This was primarily a very politically conservative movement, I think we can say, with some honesty and forthrightness. It was primarily coming from conservatives who felt that standards were weak, that educrats were shortchanging kids because they were either setting low standards or they were setting high standards, and then considering a passing grade on those standards to be very low in cut scores and things like that. So along comes Goals 2000, higher standards, No Child Left Behind, and Common Core begins to actually be discussed and to be introduced and talked about, maybe not under that name, but the general idea of standards that are the same throughout the country and that are rigorous. So that's how the conversation begins. And then we have, and my first question for you, and these are 10 questions, are 10 potential objections to Common Core state standards that we have before us, and the cartoonists have had a field day. This is Jeb Bush, supporter of the Common Core standards, and he's being interviewed, it appears, by a gentleman who's saying that Kenyan Muslim socialist Nazi propagandist done got to you, didn't he, boy? This is the accusation that Common Core is no more than an Obamacare for education, that the election of Barack Obama as president turned this into a Obamaist plan to take over education. Get the load of this one. Government school classroom, I guess that's Obama. He's filling a child's mind. It says you are now, what is that, now committed for the common good of the collective. This is quite creative. Salute Common Core, Communist International Standards Initiative. And then my favorite, which kind of looks like sort of a fascist type thing, Common Core State Education Initiative. So these are sort of the things that have been said about the whole idea of it being a Barack Obama initiative. I think on this one, I'm coming down on the side that it was not initially an initiative of the Obama administration. The Obama administration came along at a point where funds were available from Washington, and as a part of that application process, there was a portion that awarded points for the adoption of a certain level or type of standard, and the Common Core state standards were coming along at that point and met that standard. So I think question number one, are these Obama standards? Is it a form of Obama care for education? I would say I frankly don't think it is. The second, the question of data mining. And if your Facebook or your internet is not blowing up over the idea of I'm there for your children. I think this guy, he's trying to collect data on our kids, individual data on their political preferences and their shoe sizes and all this type of thing. And all of that data, of course, is going to be sent individually to Washington so that Arnie Duncan in the Department of Education will know about every child in Horry County and what they had for lunch. Now, normally I would consider this to be somewhat in the realm of concerns about fluoride in the water or anti-vaccination, that type of concern. But the only credence I would give to this one is the fact that we do live in a society where there is a lot of data. There is a lot of data that is collected in many, many different ways. And the easy access to data and the ability to share data is so widespread that on this one I would say that while primarily it is not a direct concern of Common Core state standards, I would say that we need to be very careful in this area. The State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Mick Zase, this is his number one concern, and maybe that's not the best word, but monistic, meaning one size fits all, national, will everybody be learning the same thing the same day? Will everyone be taught the same curriculum at the same time? Will every child be taught the same way at the same time? And one of the cartoonists says Common Core is a cookie cutter. I think Dr. Zase is somewhat correct in this. The likelihood that all students will be treated the same. If you have an iPhone or iPad or an Android device, you can download the Common Core app and you can look and see for every grade and for English language arts and for math, you can see what is required and expected for that grade right on your iPhone. So you can see that that's what what standards do. They lead to curriculum, which lead to testing, but they establish what needs to be completed by what grade. So on this one, I would say perhaps there is a cookie cutter approach, but is that not inevitable in the laying out of standards? So I will leave that to the other Dr. Smith to maybe address. Tag team with my cousin. The question of fuzzy math. And I'll have to tell you, this is the one that for quite a while was the most annoying to me, because I've met a lot of parents who have shown me the homework that they've brought home with their children who have attended public schools, and primarily these come from the Midlands area. I represent the 2nd district of the state on public schools. Here's the child, and she's tried her best to draw the butterfly, but unfortunately, Susie, it doesn't meet the new national standard. Well, you know, what's the difference between their butterflies? I think a lot of this, frankly, is more directed toward math and the multiple different ways that a math, see the director of the chairman of the math department here, how math is worked out and some of the issues related to it. But I am not so sure that what we're talking about here is not something known better by the term of everyday math. And that is a mathematical method that is different from Common Core. Again, Common Core standards, they're state standards, they're not curriculum. So the way that math problems may be worked out, that may be done in a confusing manner, it's not a standards issue, it is a curricular issue. So I think what we're dealing with is a concern over this method called everyday math, which I think is a great concern because it's a distraction. It's a distraction from learning. The second is, was Common Core done in a secret way, in a hurried way, sort of behind the curtain, Oz-like, you know, Oz the Magnificent retreated to his place behind the curtain and wrote the standards, and no one knew what Oz was doing or what was being written. One pro, or I guess anti-Common Core cartoon says, I thought the Common Core rollout would go better. And here you have an education commissioner who's trying to steamroll teachers and parents. I think what's being said here is, frankly, in South Carolina, there really was very little discussion. If you go back to the votes of the Education Oversight Committee and the South Carolina Department of Education in 2010, it was introduced very quickly, very little discussion. There was definitely not a national conversation. We did not engage in a national conversation and discussion about this issue. Perhaps it was under the pressure of race to the top. Perhaps there were other factors in there. But I would say this does have a little bit of credence. Some of you may, if you ever heard of these survey research who have a dial 0 to 10, I could give each one of you a dial, and you could turn it from 0 to 10 to tell me how secret you thought it was and how concerned you are about each of these 10. But I think I would have some agreement with the opponents of Common Core that maybe it was done very quickly. Very closely related to that was, and you know, the term is often bantied about educratically, meaning that really wasn't involved with teachers. And here we have the cartoon, welcome back. Do you know anything about teaching? And the expert has plopped the Common Core standards, which is obviously kind of a rotten looking apple there on the teacher's desk, and she's very frustrated because she is stuck with something that she didn't have anything to do with putting together and doesn't really care for. The question on this is, I don't know that there were really that many individuals from South Carolina who helped draft the Common Core standards. The question of being anti-fiction. Now, I'm going to surely offend everyone in the room with this one. And I'm sorry I couldn't find a better quality cartoon here, but this is Barack Obama. I think he's got a chainsaw in his hand? But he's forcing William Shakespeare, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and I think that's Jane Austen. They're being forced to walk the plank here. Well, the idea behind this is, and again, this next slide is not mine, but I'm providing it to you. Common Core porn alert. This came directly off of Facebook, so you know it's accurate. These are the three books that were considered pornography by the individual who did this slide. There is a section of Common Core called the Exemplars, Appendix B of Common Core, and it lists some examples of literature that would be appropriate for that grade level. And I know you can't read this, didn't do this really for any other purpose than to show you, here is your list of exemplars for 11th grade. Under stories, stories would be fiction, right? And then you have a list of informational text, which would be nonfiction. So you have fiction and nonfiction. Now, the question here is, and it's often been raised about Common Core, and that is Common Core wants to make Jane Austen walk the plank. Common Core wants to kill, or at least destroy, water down, weaken novels and great works of literature. And also, some of these works of literature that are recommended are very, let's say, hardcore with certain language and certain sexual situations and like that. This may be one of the most sensitive questions about Common Core state standards. However, I did notice one thing along with these informational texts, and what's being put out about the informational text is that they're like IBM computer manuals and cold, boring, dead items. As you see here, you have Thomas Paine's Common Sense, Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, but the one that jumped out at me, and I don't know how many philosophy or religion majors we have in the room, but G.K. Chesterton, The Fallacy of Success. G.K. Chesterton is one of the greatest Christian writers of all time. His most famous work was called Orthodoxy. Now, I would have really been impressed if Orthodoxy had been on the list, but we have The Fallacy of Success. So when you actually look at the list, I'm seeing some books that surely are controversial for their content. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison and Cristina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban. Those books are a little edgy. I've asked some leaders of various school districts about this, and they've been very clear that those books they don't use in their schools, and I'm hoping that many others would consider those maybe a bridge too far. I'm going to primarily skip over the issue of quality because we have those who are very much better at this than I, but the accusations have been that algebra is taught too late, there's no fiction, and many questions of those who were on the original panel that wrote the Common Core state standards, the most famous being Stotsky and Milgram, two of the authors or participants in the writing of the standards who refused to sign off on them. But at the same time, the Fordham Institute, which is very well respected, said the Common Core standards were of very good quality. Well, I'll show you the cartoons. The Common Core educational standards encourage critical thinking, which will turn students into better informed citizens and voters. No wonder Tea Party Republicans don't like them. Oh, yeah. This was pretty good. Common Core is designed to encourage critical thinking. Some detractors think that's hogwash, and some supporters think detractors are ignorant. Sounds like it's working. That may be the best cartoon of the night, because this discussion is good to have, and I'm glad you're here with it. The other question is this really, in many ways, a strike at federalism? Does it weaken the federal system? And we have a system that was designed for the states to have primary authority over education. And the concern often is that, particularly in the adoption of the Smarter Balance assessment, which is the test that would come with Common Core, did we sign away too much? And I'll just leave it at that because, again, we have experts that know a lot more about that. Is it expensive? Now, the next picture is the look on the faces of those who were testifying at the South Carolina General Assembly when they were asked what it would cost to implement Common Core fully, and then what would it cost to undo it, to put the toothpaste back in the tube, which would also be expensive. Here it is. The blank stares. I particularly like the lady in the orange hat. So these are basically my summary, and I won't go through those again, but as you can see, some of these questions of the 10 I think are of a concern, others are less of a concern, but we have various opinions, and you will see that I have taken the side of one and often the other. Our general approach as an organization, which we put out in our paper, were these recommendations, and I won't go through those since my time is gone, but I will say that even this morning, the South Carolina General Assembly House Education Committee took up a piece of legislation that virtually does exactly what we asked for here, with the exception of restructuring the governance of education. It revisits Smarter Balance, and it makes it very clear that we want South Carolina standards to be South Carolina standards, but it also says that it's just frankly too expensive at this point to completely pull out of Common Core, and we need a plan going forward that takes into account all of the costs. So I would recommend that.